To have her tell us a little bit about what she does.
So my name is Ashma Saigal, and my company's name is Database Sherpa, and we provide services to nonprofits and businesses to help guide them to developing databases themselves.
Okay, how do you go about guiding them?
Lots of training, lots of one-on-one coaching, and homework, so they actually get to do work.
Okay. Any issues that you come across while you're doing this?
Issues like problems, or issues like what?
Problems.
Problems. So probably the biggest problem is time, that they don't have enough time to do the work that needs to be done to really learn the database system and even their own processes within the organization. So that's probably the biggest issue.
So how do you overcome that?
By trying to deal with it in the front end. So when the organization contacts me, I let them know that they're going to have to spend a lot of time on their own developing and doing the database themselves. I'll be there to support them and coach them, but that they're going to be building it themselves. And that usually helps them understand what they're going to have to do. So I mean, I'm pretty upfront with them. I tell them it's going to be about 100 hours of their own time. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty aware that it's going to be a lot of time. 100 hours is a lot of time.
Do you check in on them?
Oh yeah, we check in at least every 2 to 3 weeks. We check in. There's a very precise process that I go through, so they have very specific things to learn at the end of their training, or of that particular, I call it a trek. So I use a lot of the Sherpa terms, the mountaineer terms. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the trek, they should have gained this knowledge, and then I check to make sure that they've gained the knowledge by asking them very specific questions, and then asking them to do things in the database very specifically that shows me that they've actually learned something, and then we move into the next phase.
Okay. We went about over databases versus spreadsheets. And what is the advantage of a database, in your opinion?
Spreadsheets can be really helpful if you have one set of data. So like if I just have a group of contacts that I'm trying to connect, like addresses, phone numbers, or if I'm just collecting some financial, very big, straightforward financial information, or I just want to run some numbers across. But when it gets more complicated is when you try to connect things together. So when you're trying to connect, let's say, a person and then what donations they made. It can be done in spreadsheets, but it gets more complex and more convoluted, and sometimes people make mistakes. So they'll sort, and then when they sort, they didn't highlight everything, and now everything's all off. So what databases protect users from a lot of that kind of stuff. You can actually build in protocols, and you can build in basically verification to make sure, okay, if they enter this information in, make sure that they enter this information in next. So it just kind of protects the data. You're not having to enter it in multiple times, you just enter it in one time.
Okay. So why should organizations use databases?
Because they don't have to double entry.
Mm-hmm.
Also, reporting is a lot better. So, for example, an organization that does a lot of client tracking, so tracking the clients and how many times they talk to them and that kind of information. Mm-hmm. And a spreadsheet would get very cumbersome to figure out how many times I talked to this person. Whereas if you ran in a database, you could easily do a report that showed you every contact that you had and as long as you entered it in, clearly, mm-hmm. And every kind of all the details of that particular client. So in that way, it makes it a lot easier.
Okay. Are there any things that you do with technology that would be considered interesting or different than other people might use them?
That I use technology?
Or databases in specific?
So if there's anything interesting that I do with databases, or that I work with? So most consultants don't teach their clients how to do their job. They want to do the work for the client and get called again and again and again. So the unique thing that I do is that I expect my clients to never call me again, so that once I've helped them develop a database, they're now fully capable of continuing to do the process themselves, and they don't need me anymore, and I can move on to the next client. So that's different than what most consultants do in database work.
Could you walk me through some steps that you use to get them to that point of not having to call you again?
Sure. I mean, basically the whole process is that. So the first thing that I do with all the organizations is I get a copy of every spreadsheet that they use, that they want to put in this database. If they already have a database and they want to use, this is a cloud-based database that I'm using called Salesforce.
We've talked about cloud
Clouds.
computing.
Yep. So this is all out in the internet, in the ether, and so lots of them will have access databases that sit on a hard drive on their computers. So I'll have them send me all of that information, and it kind of gives me a good picture of what they're trying to accomplish. I write a proposal that outlines specifically what we're going to be doing, sort of every trek, every meeting that we're going to have, what we're going to discuss. And then as we go through the process, I realize that there's additional things they need to learn or more information they need to gather. I give them specific projects to do. So like I'll say, I want you to go to this website and I want you to search for this term and I want you to read about what this topic is about. And then when we get back together again, we're going to talk about what that means and how you can implement it in your organization. So there's a lot of like back and forth, them doing homework, them trying actually getting their fingers in the database, doing the work that they need to do before we actually get all the data in there so that they're not messing anything up once it's in there.
So it's a lot of hands-off for you?
A lot of, it's not, I'm not doing the work, they're doing the work, so it is hands-off, but there's a lot of prep work that I have to do to figure out what they need to learn next. So I'm kind of always like 5 steps ahead of them, like figuring out, okay, they're going to be done with figuring out how to put new fields in their database. So now what I need to do is get their spreadsheets ready so that they can import their data. So then I'm like kind of thinking about how are we going to import the data? What are some of the questions we need to uncover before we import their data? What cleaning, like what database cleaning do we have to do, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So it's like I'm thinking probably 5 or 6 steps ahead of them.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Is that hard for you to do, or?
Yeah, because sometimes I want to give them those steps already. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like I'm 5 steps ahead. I want you to be here. So I have to keep reminding myself that they're still like 5 steps behind me.
So
don't give them too much stuff, you know.
Does that get frustrating?
Yeah. Not for me. I think it's more like I don't want them to feel overwhelmed. So I'm always checking in with them. You know, are you feeling overwhelmed? Do we need to slow down the pace? So I'm always kind of there's a lot of back and forth with them. But usually in that 2-week period, so like I will have a trek and then they have about 2 weeks to do the work and then we meet again in 2 weeks. In that 2-week period, I typically don't hear from them. You know, they may contact me once or twice with like a very specific question. But their goal is to really try and solve all their problems themselves because the goal is that I won't be here anymore. So the more that they can solve problems themselves, the less they're going to need me.
How did you come about this area of work?
I've been working with databases, as Andy knows, for a really long time. Since I graduated, I went to Michigan State, and I've been working in the field since then, 1991. And the nonprofit world, so I've always worked in I'd always worked in the corporate world, you know, working with people with developing databases for all kinds of companies. And was only when I went into the nonprofit world that I realized that the issue with databases really strives from the nonprofits not having the capacity or the knowledge to really maintain and manage their own databases. So I tried like way back when, actually when I worked with Andy at NPower, we did some access training classes, and it was like a really hard thing for them to grasp some of the database terminologies. It just didn't make sense to them. You know, social workers don't necessarily jive with techies, right? It just doesn't go together. So I always was frustrated. I did my master's at Grand Valley, and I did my research around technology and nonprofits, and found that it was, again, one of the big stumbling blocks was data. You know, like, we don't understand our data. We had a consultant make a database for us, but we don't get it anymore. It doesn't make sense. So it was always this high level of frustration for them. And I thought, there's got to be a way to kind of, and I term it as bringing compassion or bringing heart into database work. And so the idea started with a grant I got from a local foundation, and I had an idea that I could use this tool, Salesforce, to help nonprofits build their own databases. So I started with 3 organizations, and that was like 4 years ago now, they still have their databases. They're growing them and managing them, and I don't hear from them except when I call them to ask them, how are you doing?
Wow.
So I'm like, I think I'm stumbling onto something here. And so I just kept going with it and just kept refining it. So first I started doing the work one-on-one with organizations, and then I thought, well, I wonder if I could do it in a classroom setting. So I brought 10 organizations in a classroom together and trained them. I didn't like it as much because it wasn't as personalized and customized. So now I've really, like, I feel like this is the iteration that I am at right now, which is a really refined, customized database consulting project. But what I'm really doing is coaching. So I'm kind of more of a teacher than I am someone that does the work for you. And I'm also someone who's going to kind of project manage it and make sure that things get done on time and just kind of keep on track, but at your pace. So whatever your pace is. So that has been really fun, and I kind of piloted it with one organization.
Has the technology changed at all that you have had to adapt to? Are there any changes that you have had to make according to new technologies or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I'm sure
Technology, like, look at this phone. I mean, it's like, I think when I had my own business before I started this one in 94, 95. I mean, the internet was just starting, and there was no, I mean, it was like email pretty much. There was a little bit of World Wide Web, but it was really like nothing. I mean, Yahoo.
This was right when you started?
That was when I didn't start this business. It was another business I had.
Okay.
And I think, like, where we were then to where we are now in such a really short period of time. And even when I look at, like, 2019, you might remember, I don't know if you remember Y2K, when it was, like, going to be, when the year 2000 hit, they had predicted, like, this huge, cataclysmic, horrible thing was going to happen. Like, food would be expired. I mean, it was just going to be insane. And that was just 2000. I mean, that was just, that was not that long ago. And to where we are today, where people are walking around with phones that are like computers, where you can surf on anything. I mean, everything is changing so rapidly. So I think probably for me, the big thing was just focusing, because I think back in the day, yes, I could be a web developer, I could help you network your computers, I could do everything. To today, where you really need to be more focused and more specialized. So I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to focus on doing databases. Because that's what I like. It's what I think benefits organizations the most. And they can really see value in it. Like, right away, they can start to see reports, and they can start to, like, you know, update contact information. So it becomes very real to them. Whereas a website, you know, it's kind of just sits out there, and I think someone's visiting, and maybe they're getting something from it. But, you know, the data is so important to an organization. It really is a lifeblood of an organization. Bad data is bad for the organization.
Right. How do organizations hear about you or know about you, or?
It's all been word of mouth. So I'm actually launching this next week a referral program where I'm going to ask the organizations that I've done this work with. I've done enough now. I probably have 14 organizations that I've worked with.
Okay.
So I figure, okay, I can go to those 14 organizations and I can ask them to refer me to other organizations. And the model that I'm using is, I'm calling it gift of gratitude. So rather than it being a referral fee, it's a gift of gratitude. Most of the organizations I work with are nonprofits. So those organizations that are referring me to other organizations, I'm asking them not just to refer, but to show what we've done together and explain it to them. And so in the end, what I will do is the proposal amount, whatever that organization's proposal amount was, and that they accept and that we work on, at the end of the project, I'll give 5% back to that nonprofit organization that has referred me as a donation.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so it's kind of it's a soft launch right now. I'm just meeting with the organizations that I worked with right now, because I'm not prepared to take on an onslaught of what could happen. But so far, everyone's been very interested in being a part. And I'm not asking them to go through their Rolodexes and, like, find people, but more, you know, conversation comes up and you hear someone complaining about their spreadsheets or how I can't get anything out of my Access database, or I'm frustrated with whatever I'm using. Pass my name on, and then, you know, they can either call me, or you can say, hey, let me show you what we have, you know, and then I can give them the tools that allows them to show, because not all organizations have, like, the software to do the sharing and the viewing of databases, you know. They may not be in the same city, you know, like I might meet you at a conference and say, hey, I've got a great database consultant I work with, and I'll show you what she's done for us, you know. That kind of, I think that will spread the name faster than if I were to go around knocking on doors.
Right. So do they have to have a certain technology in order to, like...
To show the database?
Yeah.
So I use GoToMeeting. That's how I do all of my, I know Andy uses a whole bunch of different ones, but I use GoToMeeting for it. It's been really easy. All of the people, like, as unsophisticated as a lot of them are, they can figure out how to use, they can, like, connect. I've never had anyone not be able to connect to one of my meetings. some of the other tools out there just are a little more, they require a little more, finesse that some of the organizations just don't have the capacity for. So I'm like, I want to make it as easy as possible for them. They click on a link, the software automatically installs. It's a no-brainer. So yeah, I can give them access to a go-to meeting, meeting, and then they can show, which is what I did with one organization. So they can, I don't even have to be on the meeting. They take on the meeting, I leave, and they can do their meeting. So it's really good that way.
Simple? Okay.
Yep, worked so far.
Well, that was a 17-minute long